Yeah, so Emma, I noticed in your paper, the title of the paper is Methods Used for Estimating Sleep in Dairy Cattle. And I noticed that there was different ways of hooking up different types of electrodes. And I think when you started doing that, you were finding this drowsing thing. Can you expand on that? Katie mentioned you might be interested in expanding on measurement devices, but also this concept that they can drowse, which is interesting. Is that what they do in my lectures, or how does that work? Is that a
Yeah.
form of drowsing?
I
Is
was
that where they're like looking at their cell phone and half asleep? Is that drowsing? I don't
yeah.
know. Hello, and welcome to this special episode of Dairy Digressions, the podcast of the American Dairy Science Association, the Journal of Dairy Science, and JDS Communications. I'm Matt Lucy, former editor-in-chief of Journal of Dairy Science and former editor-in-chief of JDS Communications and fellow of the American Dairy Science Association, and I will be your host. Dairy Digestions is where we look inside the science and scientists that are making headlines both inside and outside the dairy industry. We explore the cutting edge research that creates knowledge and drives innovation in the production and processing of milk for human consumption. Hey, everybody, help me grow the podcast. We need your help. All you need to do is like and subscribe and spread the word to a friend or colleague. Now, let's get to the podcast. Today, it is fantastic. This is a special honor. We are celebrating a special issue to be published in JDS Communications on behavior in dairy animals. This special issue coming out includes 29 papers, which covers all sorts of topics on animal behavior. And I want to give a special shout out to those who have worked so hard to put this dairy behavior episode together, including Pam Ruig, who reviewed many of the papers, Jess McCart, who carried a lot of the heavy load. We'd also like to thank Elsevier, who sponsored the page charges for many of these publications. Today, we have with us two of our authors from this special issue, Katy Proudfoot and Emma Ternman. Welcome, Katy and Emma.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for having
Hi,
us
there you go. How
today.
about Emma?
Hello. Nice to be
Hello.
here.
Oh, fantastic. JDS Communications always goes along the same way. We're going to start with sort of some brief introductions of the individual people. And just so we get to know you a little bit, and I spoke and I said, hey, I know Katy a little more than I know Emma, but we're going to get to know Emma. And I have some secret facts about myself that I'm going to share with Emma, okay, which will no longer be secret. Okay, so that'll be coming up. So stay listening. So Katy Proudfoot is an associate professor and director of the Sir Dunn Animal Welfare Center at the Atlantic Veterinary College and the University of Prince Edward Island, where she teaches animal behavior and welfare to veterinary students and conducts both basic and applied research. Now, Katy is not a Canadian.
Trying to become a Canadian.
Oh my goodness, native of California. And if you know anything about American politics, California is practically Canada. I don't know. That's just a little joke. It's a political season, you know. And anyways, she got her MS and BS from the University of British Columbia, animal welfare, and lives on the beach. Are you kidding me? Close to the beach. What does that mean? How many blocks from the beach?
Couple blocks from the beach. You
Uh,
can do that in Prince Edward Island.
yeah, you're
It's
always
actually affordable.
yeah, you know, you walk one way, you hit the beach, you walk the other way, you hit the beach.
I
I
can
mean,
see the ocean from my window.
that's the spirit. But can you see Russia? Okay, that's the question. Oh, ouch. All right. No, she currently lives close to the beach with her husband and young daughter. So that is fantastic. The second guest that we have is Emma Ternman. You're an associate professor, faculty of bioscience and agriculture at Nord University in Norway. Have I got it right?
Yeah, Faculty of Bioscience and Aquaculture.
Aquaculture at Nord
Yeah,
University.
at Nord University in Norway.
Okay, so I'm looking on the map of Norway.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, okay, I didn't even get it. Nord University must be in northern Norway.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Are you above the Arctic Circle or not?
Actually, so Nord University is quite a long university. You have several different campuses. So
Mhm.
the main campus is above the Arctic Circle, and I'm like 6 hours below it. I'm actually in the middle of Norway.
Well, you can't be
Indeed.
northern Norway if you're in the middle of Norway, can you? How did that work?
The people in South, they would say this is the northern Norway, but we say it's not really, because Norway is super long and
Yeah.
meets Russia on the top.
Oh, yeah. So you can see Russia from your town. Do you live on a fjord or anything interesting like that, or do you live in town?
I mean, I live in town, but the fjord is right outside here. And Steinkjer, my town, is very close to the fjord
Yeah,
and
so
beautiful surroundings.
beautiful. You know, you might not know this about me, Emma. My grandparents are Norwegian.
Wow.
I know. Can't you tell with just the attitude I have all the time that it must be a Norwegian? No, my grandparents are Norwegian, and my grandfather is from near Bergen, a town called Birkeland. My grandmother is from Arendal. Actually, her town was called Lona. These two towns are in very south of Norway. I mean, they're further south than Oslo. They came to the United States through Ellis Island. My mother was born in New York. My grandfather was working. He was a carpenter. During the Depression, they sent her back to Norway. So we have many relatives there. I was there a few years back to visit everyone. Got to visit the house where my grandmother grew up. It was a fantastic trip.
I can imagine. I'm
It's,
actually Swedish, so I moved here 2 years ago.
you're
Had-
Swedish?
Yeah, had hardly been to Norway before I moved here.
Oh my
But it's-
goodness gracious. Well, we don't mind the Swedes except when we're competing in cross-country skiing, okay? That's the only thing we care about, all right? You know, it's a cross-country skiing. You're Swedish.
Yep,
Okay. That's the country next to Norway, right?
indeed it is. Yes.
Indeed it is. Okay. So Katy, I see that you have a degree from UCLA in sort of neuroscience or neurobiological science. So what the heck, man? That's not dairy cows, okay? What's that all about?
Actually, it's kind of tied with the paper we're talking about today because when I was an undergrad, I was super interested in sleep and how
No
the brain,
way.
yeah, in people. Because I am one of those people who has always had like super vivid dreams, and I was always curious about why we sleep, what happens to our brain when we sleep, why am I dreaming? Do my dreams mean anything? I read all those like Freudian books about meanings and dreams, which probably don't actually make any sense. So I took a class on sleep and dreams at UCLA. And the first research job that I worked at was at a lab that studied sleep and stress in inflammatory disease in people. So people with rheumatoid arthritis. And that taught me two things. One, that I loved research. And two, I did not want to study people. So I decided at that time, like I was super passionate about animals, but my experience had been working with animals in such a way that used them as models for people in neuroscience research. And I didn't want to do that either. So I just looked around. I Googled at the time. I don't remember if Google was around back then, but I just searched for, is there a career where you could study animals to actually help animals? And that's how I found UBC. Still to this day, like UBC Animal Welfare Program is a big player in the field of animal welfare. But Nina von Kaiserlink, who became my master's and PhD supervisor, said, we'll take you for a master's, but the only project we have is with cows, and you've never met a cow before.
Oh my
so
goodness.
before we sign you up officially, you have to go live on and work on the UBC dairy farm and decide if it's something that you want to do. And so I did that, and here I am. So obviously.
So do you have a degree in veterinary medicine? You don't have a degree
I don't.
in veterinary. Okay,
Nope.
cool. All right. So Emma, you've got quite a few publications on sort of sleep and dairy as well. Tell me about that interest. So you're Swedish. So did you go to the University of Stockholm, or where did you go?
The only university in Sweden that does like agriculture is Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. So I got my bachelor's, my master's, and then my PhD from that university. And my career path is like filled of banana peels. So I I did the same as Katy. I Googled to find an education that would get me to work with animals. And then I found this agronomist education, as it is called. I didn't enter the sleep area with a huge interest in sleep, but I like gadgets, tiny things that can record behavior or other things in animals. And then I did a small project with a person. His name is Per Pets Nilsson, and he later became my master's supervisor and my PhD supervisor. So I did this small accelerometer project and working with this device and did a good job. And then they got some money for some sleep research and they ordered some EEG equipment. And none of my supervisors knew anything about equipment. So they were like, okay, we need a student who can handle this. And then I was asked if I wanted to join the team as a PhD student. And then I did. And then, of course, sleep is one of my favorite things to do. So I didn't hesitate on that one.
Now, in your current position, do you work with dairy or do you work with some other species, or are you working with dairy?
Mostly dairy. I teach in other species, but my research field is dairy cows.
So at your university, do you have a farm there?
We have a collaboration with an ag school that has a farm that we can use. But of course, that is sort of limits us on what we can do because they need to teach their pupils management of a normal dairy barn. But we can do herd level studies and things like that.
I'm going to ask you about dairying in Norway, but before I do that, I'll ask Katy about dairy in Canada, okay? And so for you people out there in audio land, Katy lives on Prince Edward Island. I have a picture of that. First of all, finding it on the map is nearly impossible because it's so small. Let us remind you that Prince Edward Island is a province in the country of Canada, but is 1/100th the size of Saskatchewan. I just want to lay it out there. And the reason I mentioned Saskatchewan is because our editor-in-chief, Paul Kunanoff, is a native of Saskatchewan. So defend your province, Katy. Defend it. I mean, why isn't it just a turn off the highway or something? Well, our exit ramp. I see you have a bridge there. Why? Why is it a province? What makes it special? Who's Prince Edward? Help me out.
I can't tell you the history of Prince Edward, but I can tell you that we have beautiful beaches. Anne of Green Gables is from Prince Edward Island, so that's why most people come here. Yep.
Yeah, okay.
It's a really neat place to live. I encourage anyone to come visit. Although we're a very small dairy industry, there's only about 150 dairy farms on PEI. We have the highest milk production per capita in Canada. And so we have like awesome ice creams. Our ice creams in Prince Edward, most importantly, is kind of like world famous at a place called Cows. So come and eat some Cows ice cream. The other thing that we do in PEI is we grow potatoes. So if you come here, then you have to eat ice cream and French fries, which I feel like, everybody likes those two things.
I think it's important that people understand that to get to Prince Edward Island, you go to Quebec and just keep driving.
You have to go through New Brunswick as well.
And
we're in a different time zone than Eastern. Some people don't know that. Like we have our own time zone, Atlantic.
Oh, yeah.
So we're a whole hour ahead.
Oh my God. Well, let me help you out here, Katy, a little bit. Okay. Okay. So Canada, you got to know about Canada. Canada, the Canadian dairy, there's all this drama. The different provinces just compete with one another in terms of their dairy. Okay, so most of the cows in Canada are found in Quebec and Ontario.
Yep.
And then, but you wouldn't know that because when you go to British Columbia, you think that all the cows are in British Columbia, right? And you're at the veterinary school in Prince Edward Island. And I'm thinking to yourself, what are you going to say to like Stephen LeBlanc when you're trash talking at the dairy science meeting? You know what you're going to tell him? You're going to tell him that, well, Stephen, I know you've got 315,000 cows in Ontario, but let me remind you that we don't have as many cows, but if you calculate the density of cows in Prince Edward Island, it's 5.6 cows per square mile in Prince Edward. Dairy cows in per square mile. You got a ton of cows there.
Some of the most beautiful dairy farms I've ever seen as well, because they have like these beautiful rolling hills overlooking the ocean. Yeah. So cows with $1 million views in Prince Edward Island. And
with the density of cows in Ontario, we got these people from Guelph and all about how great it is. 0.75. Like a tenth. You can't find a cow in Ontario, but you certainly going to run into a cow in Prince Edward Island. So I did not know you got a lot of cows there. It's packed. Does your veterinary school must have a clinic? You get a lot of cows into the clinic and stuff?
Yep. Yeah, we have a large animal hospital for cows and horses and a small animal hospital.
Now, just so you don't get too proud, let's remember that Wisconsin has 20 cows per square mile. Okay. And New York has 11 cows per square mile. Norway has about 200,000 cows, Emma. And I imagine they're mostly Norwegian red. Or is that true? Or you guys switch over to Holsteins?
No, most of the cows I've seen around here are the Norwegian Reds.
Where are they mostly found? In southern Norway, or where do you see cows in Norway?
That was a really good question that I don't really know. But in my region up here, in the region called Trøndelag, we grow quite a lot of food that is grown here in Norway, because Norway, there are mountains everywhere. So it's tricky to grow things. So for example, where your grandparents were from, that region, they don't even grow crops there. Like they can't grow anything, and they live of the sea. We do have quite a lot of cows up here where I live.
I'm interested in sort of dairying in Norway, and we'll talk about dairying in Canada in a second. I'll just prep Katy, and then I'll ask you this question. In terms of attitude towards dairy cows, you've gone all the way from Western Canada to Eastern Canada, and those attitudes about dairy change. But I'll ask you, Emma, about attitudes towards dairy in Scandinavia compared to maybe the rest of the European Union. Is there anything, particularly from the animal welfare perspective, is there anything unique or different the way Scandinavians look at dairy animals or animals in farm production from a welfare perspective than might be different than the Dutch or the Italians or something like that? Or is everybody simply on the same page and under the same regulations?
I think Norway is quite different because we're not part of the EU. So
you're not.
They have their own legislation. Of course, it's sort of aligned with the European Union, usually a bit tougher. So the welfare requirements are a bit higher here in Norway. I think also what is different, so it's, for me, moving from Sweden to Norway was a huge difference because the average herd size here is 30 cows. And I think the average herd size in Sweden is 80. So, and 60% of all the cows here in Norway are actually kept in AMS systems. So with automatic milking.
60%?
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Okay, cool. Right.
That's very different from Sweden. You couldn't afford having an automatic milking system on 30 cows in Sweden. But in Norway, they have a system to keep the whole country alive. So they have financial means to keep their production within the country and try to provide the farmers the possibilities to do that. Yeah, forgot your question.
No, that's an excellent answer to that question. And I think you bring up the automatic milking systems. As you know, in America, most of the milk is produced on farms with over 1,000 cows. Okay. And remarkably, I can't get the percentages, but you can break it out to farms with over 2,500 cows. And you'll find, I think, over half the cows in America are found on farms with over 2,500 cows. And what's so interesting about what you say is that when you have a smaller farm, you can drop a robotic milker onto it, and it just completely changes things. Cows can make decisions. I want to go to the milking parlor. And I saw this in Canada when I was visiting there, but I'd never seen it. And it's just very interesting. So Katy, on Prince Edward Island, do you have a lot of AMS, or is it pretty much tie stalls, or what do we got going on?
It's about 50-50 tie stalls, free stalls.
Okay.
But there's more and more AMS because our average herd size is around 60. So that's the size where one robot would work well. But there's a couple larger farms that have a couple of robots.
Do you notice any difference between attitudes between like Western Canada and Eastern Canada and the way they approach dairying or think about dairying or regulations or anything like that?
Nothing in terms of regulations. I would say that farms are bigger in BC. And when you talk about attitudes, you mean like the public attitudes towards dairy farming?
Yeah. How do they feel about it?
I would say that like in PEI, especially, our biggest city is 50,000, which is Charlottetown. And you drive for 5 minutes and you could be at a dairy farm. Yeah. So my guess is that people here are a little bit more connected to dairying because whereas in BC, I lived in Vancouver, which was, I don't know, a couple million people. So there might be just less connection and less knowledge about the industry. Doesn't necessarily mean having less knowledge means that, they don't care, because I do feel like they certainly would care. But
first of all, I'd like to say, I don't think I've had two guests from more beautiful places. Okay. I mean, but I was looking at Prince Edward Island and I thought to myself, wow, you really scored. Okay. You really scored. Okay. To get on that place, and I'm going to come visit you someday in Nordland. Okay. Because you look like it's from a beautiful place as well. I want to ask you about your paper. And again, we're sort of talking about papers from this special issue in JDS Communications. And for the people that might be listening who might be peripheral to the dairy industry, behavior and welfare in dairy is becoming a big deal and a big focus of all farm animals, right? I think we went through an era where maybe we didn't think about it too much, but now we're really asking a lot of questions about how can we offer an animal a fulfilling life, but also, in the case of dairy, collect human food from that animal. And it's our job. And I always tell people, just because we do things a certain way now doesn't mean we have to do things a certain way forever. Things can change. In America, more so than Canada or Norway, we've migrated to very large herds. And I always think about that. We know that cows actually, if we look at things like somatic cell count and those sorts of indicators, the large herds do an outstanding job taking care of their cows. The evidence would suggest that cows actually, for a lot of health traits, are probably healthier on a large US dairy than they might be on some other dairy. But nonetheless, you think about, a lot of us got interested in dairy just because we enjoy cows. And I don't know, I'd kind of rather manage 30 cows than 3,000 cows. You know what I mean? Because it's a little more personal, but that's just me. But why I want to talk about sleep in dairy cows. First of all, I want to remind everybody that we have things called time budgets for dairy cows. And I don't know if you have these in Norway or not, but in America, we have things like time budgets. And so on American dairy, where cows are milked 3 times daily, and we like to give them 12 to 14 hours of resting time. And there's data, I think Trevor DeVries, I'm probably misquoting this, but I don't know. Maybe it was one of you two that suggests that for every extra hour of resting time, we'll actually get some more milk out of a cow. So which one of you would like to begin by introducing this concept of sleeping in dairy cows? Now, I think what I got from your paper that this 12 to 14 hours of lying and resting is not sleeping. Emma, you start. Tell me about that.
12 to 14 hours of lying down is not necessarily 12 to 14 hours of sleeping. That is correct. So according to old studies and also the studies that I've done, the cows sleep about 3 hours a day. And they sleep in short bouts, so not necessarily 3 hours during the nighttime, but maybe half an hour at night and then 15 minutes here, 10 minutes there.
So if you just took them and put them in a barn with nice comfy straw, would they sleep more? Are they not sleeping because of their environment or just their biology?
I think it's actually their biology, because the large herbivores, none of them sleep for long. They are free animals, so they would not survive if they lay down and slept for 8 hours. So I don't think they would sleep a lot more if you gave them all the opportunities to do so. I had my cows in an individual pen, so they literally had all the time they needed. Of course, they were lactating, so milked twice a day. They had a lot of time to sleep, and they didn't really engage more in sleep.
Katy, you studied sleep in humans. I know as an undergraduate, you mentioned that. Why do they suggest 6 to 8 hours of, 6 to 8 or 8 to 9 hours of sleep in people? And why does that change for different species?
I need 9 hours.
You need 9 hours, different people. Okay.
Everybody's different, but yeah, there's that sort of 8 to 9 hours. I mean, as Emma said, like from sleep is ubiquitous across the animal kingdom. Every animal sleeps. Even dolphins and whales will sleep while swimming because they can sleep with one hemisphere at a time. And so I think every species has sort of adapted a different way of getting this really essential biological process. And for humans, we have the luxury of we could be protected to have like either up in trees or now in houses where we can have these like long bouts. Although according to some people, humans are actually naturally biphasic sleepers. So technically we should be having a nap around like 3 o'clock or something, a siesta.
So we are biphasic. So that's reality then. I thought that was just, everybody told me it's because you eat food and all the blood goes to your stomach. Is that not true? Or is that just like...
Well, it's just a way for your brain to get the sleep it needs. And if you look at the literature on sleep, like we've been studying sleep in humans for so long that we understand how essential it is. Like they've done kind of mean studies with rodents where they kept them awake and they will die if they don't get enough sleep. And for a lot of researchers that study sleep in people, they consider not sleeping enough like a public health concern because sleep deprivation is tied to cardiovascular disease, metabolic disease, cancer, mental health issues. Like there's tons of research showing all of these problems that come when you don't sleep enough. So that's the message out there to all the people listening, is that you should sleep more. But then we don't understand, we can't just take this knowledge and say like, well, it must be the same for cows because cows are different. And that's why Emma and I are interested in studying sleep in different species like a cow, because they are a prey animal where they have to be vigilant for a lot of the time. And I'll let Emma talk a little bit more about this, but they also do this really cool thing where they have this, they call it drowsing. So that they're not in like a fully sleep state, but they can do it while they ruminate, and they might actually be getting some mental rest while they're ruminating. So there's different ways that different species have adapted to get this essential rest and sleep.
Yeah, so Emma, I noticed in your paper, and the title of the paper is Methods Used for Estimating Sleep in Dairy Cattle. And I noticed that there was different ways of hooking up different types of electrodes. And I think when you started doing that, you were finding this drowsing thing. Can you expand on that? Katy mentioned you might be interested in expanding on measurement devices, but also this concept that they can drowse, which is interesting. Is that what they do in my lectures, or how does that work? Is that a form of drowsing? Is that where they're like looking at their cell phone and half asleep? Is that drowsing? I don't know.
Yeah, I was going to say, because we also drowse, humans also do. And there are a few studies on that, drowsing while driving a car, for example. It's an intermediate state between awake and asleep, or it has been described as that previously. We are discussing it, how we should sort of where it belongs. But yeah, it's more or less that you have a lowered or an increased threshold for being sort of woken up, but it's still lower than being properly asleep. So it's some kind of zoning out situation going on. And they seem to be doing that quite a lot when they are ruminating, as also can be seen if you go into a barn and you see the cows ruminate. They look as if they are in their own world. But we also do that. And this drowsing piece is when you're going from awake to asleep. So when you're about to fall asleep, you're actually passing through the drowsing state.
You hook up all sorts of electrodes to cows on their brains. And I think in your paper, you discussed, I don't know, the early electrodes were like stuck in the brain, but now you use the ones on top of the brain. Is that how that works?
Yeah, so the early work was done with the electrodes that were placed straight on the brain. So drilling holes and then putting in like metal bar into the brain. The brain doesn't feel pain. So that's what my physiology professor told me when I kind of...
Yeah. I'll remember that. Okay.
Yep.
The things our professors tell us. Okay, I'll believe it though, because it's probably maybe there's no pain neurons in there. I don't know.
No.
So, anyways, no brain, no pain. Okay.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, and then you get really clear signals, of course, from the brain activity. So what we do when we just shave the head of the cows and then we sort of glue on these surface attached electrodes is that we get a lot of noise from other things that is between the electrode and the actual brain. So any kind of tiny muscle movements or skin, even movements from the ears will affect the signals that we get out of it. You can add some filters to it, and then you can sort of get a quite nice, clean data. Anyway, that is almost as good as the implanted.
When we talk about REM sleep, you don't need anything else than those devices to detect rapid eye movement sleep, right? That's deep sleep.
Yeah, so we have the rapid eye movement sleep is also known as the dream sleep. And that's when we have these rapid eye movements that you can see, like blinking and things like that, and a bit of twitching. So when dogs are sort of running in their sleep, that's during the REM sleep phase. The deep sleep is the non-REM sleep, and that's when we are sort of more quiet sleep phase. Also more quiet in the brain, because the REM sleep phase, from a brain activity perspective, it looks like we're awake.
It appears during that because of the dreams that are going on.
we can't say that it's because of the dreams, but because then we would, someone to actually talk to us during the REM sleep phase to say, yeah, I'm dreaming, and that's why my brain activity looks like this. But what do we think is that we are sort of repeating the events during the day and then making memories out of them.
So, Katy, do we have any evidence that animals other than humans dream?
Ooh, good question. I don't know the answer to that question because we can't ask them like we can ask humans. We do have evidence that they have REM sleep. So they have the part of sleep where they can dream, and Emma might know more than I do around this. I will say, like, there's a lot of theories about why we dream. And as Emma said, there's so many processes that happen during sleep. You can't say sleep is just for one thing, but one of the things that we do during sleep is we consolidate memories from short-term to long-term, which is why I always tell my students not to pull all-nighters because that's counterproductive. You won't remember the stuff that you learn at 2 a.m.
Right.
Sleep is there for consolidation of memories, and it could be that part of what dreams are is that replaying of memories, but also there's some theories that has to do with sort of the separation of emotions from memories, which might be really important for us too. So every time we have a memory, we don't feel an emotion tied to it. There's some research with people with PTSD, for example, that don't have that separation. So yeah, long story short, I don't think we know for sure that animals dream, but I think it's likely that they have something like dreaming. They won't have language in their dream, but they might have pictures and memories and things because they likely use REM sleep to help consolidate memories just like we do.
I think when those dogs are doing this business, they gotta
they're
be
chasing
running
after something.
They're chasing something. I'm gonna catch that cat,
Yeah.
darn it all. This time I'm getting them, Yeah, that's really interesting. So you guys are super interested in sleep, and like I said, the title of your paper in this special issue, Methods Used for Estimating Sleep. So if you want to estimate sleep, why? Who cares, right? So let's just talk about it there's pure science. It sounds like we've got three scientists here talking, but science is science. I love science. I'm really into it. Okay. And so I'm perfectly happy just to figure out if cows dream. I think that's interesting. But how do you justify it to your agricultural people, to a dairy farmer? Okay, why do I need to know how much this cow is sleeping? What is your go-to argument? I guess we'll start from a Norwegian perspective. Why would a dairy farmer say, hey, why do I even need to know this?
Well, number one, the dairy farmers are just as interested as we are in how their cows are doing and if they're sleeping. So I think that's just one thing that they think it's fascinating. But then the more sort of serious aspect is, of course, that, as Katy mentioned, a lack of sleep will negatively affect a lot of systems in the body, including the immune system and also maybe the production. So you will actually lose money if they don't get enough sleep. That's my main argument that I use when I talk to the farmers, why sleep is important.
One of the things I think about, particularly with automated milking systems or robotic milking, is if a cow is sleeping, you're not going to interrupt her to get her to take her to the parlor. Do you think that's important?
I always struggled when I was working as a farmhand. I always struggled to ask the cows to stand up if I could clearly see that they were sleeping. They had their heads bent over and they were like twitching, so they were in REM sleep phase. And then I always struggled waking them up from this sleep to get them to milking in the parlor. So I think that using an AMS is, I think, better for the cows in that sense. Of course, in an automatic milking system, you strive for a 24-hour production, which means that the cows needs to be doing things throughout the 24 hours. And then it's a risk that a lot of cows are up during times that other cows want to sleep.
Katy, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's an interesting research question that we should write a grant for, Emma. Yeah, I agree because I thought of this a lot. It took me a while to come back to sleep. Like I studied other things after UBC, and it wasn't until I was an assistant professor at Ohio State that I did my first sleep cow study. But it was after visiting a couple of farms, one in particular that was like 4X milking, and we were doing something. This was when I was a young professor, and I thought it was still cool to like go and collect data with my students when it required me to be there at 2 a.m.
Yeah.
I don't do that anymore, but that I just noticed that like all the lights on in the barn, there's noise all the time in the barn, 24 hours a day noise. Cows are moving around. Like there was never this in this particular farm and some others that I visited. this like dark, quiet time. And as Emma said, like cows can sleep all throughout the day, but they do sleep a lot at night. And, we still don't understand fully, like, how does being in a freestall affect their sleep? How does lighting and noise and human handling affect their sleep? So I think there's just a lot of unanswered questions, which makes it a really exciting area of research for those of us biased people who are interested in sleeping cows.
No, I think you've articulated it really well. I mean, humans are not cows, but we all know the implications of being woken up from a deep sleep. For me personally, I stopped using an alarm clock. I just wake up naturally. I don't know if that's the right word, but I think that's healthier. I typically wake up within 15 minutes of the time I want to wake up. My body knows when it wants to wake up. It's kind of been programmed, but I don't allow a machine to mechanically interrupt any phase of my sleep cycle. And I think you guys have really hit on something here, that, we know all about time budgets and we know about the value of rest in cows, but people are assuming that just because that cow is laying in a freestall, that rest is equivalent. And maybe it's vastly different for that individual. And I think, Emma, you brought up a great point. I mean, you're obviously a very sensitive person, as you are, Katy, but that you're like, I felt kind of bad about getting this cow up when she was sleeping. We have this thing in America. I don't know if you have it in Norway. I'm sure you have it in Canada, but let cows be cows. This is this notion that you need to let them express their natural behaviors and don't interrupt those natural behaviors. And that's why many dairies are really moving away from things like headlocks or anytime you have to like physically restrain a cow or interrupt what she might want to do. And I think this kind of fits with that, not interrupting sleep patterns. So that's why you wrote this paper. It sounded like you wanted to up the quality of the measurements for sleep in cows.
Oh, I was going to say, I'll add as well that, and then I'll hand it over to Emma to explain this more. But the reason why we've decided to put this in the behavior special issue is that you can measure also the posture of the cow, the behavior of the cow, as a way of estimating sleep. However, what we say in the paper is that there's many challenges to that based on research that Emma's done and others. And so currently, like the best way of measuring sleep is still using these electrodes. But I'll hand it over to Emma a little bit to talk about behavioral measurements of sleep and why it's challenging for cows.
Thank you. Well, it is challenging because the cows can, as I said, they're drowsing for a bit, and that's not necessarily sleep. So it looks like they are sleeping. It's like humans. It's hard to tell if a human is asleep or awake if the human is lying down, eyes closed, completely still, and not reacting to what you're saying, because the person just don't want to be disturbed. And it's the same with the cows. They lie down in the sleep positions and they are actually fully awake, or they're drowsing. And then using behavior won't tell us about whether the cow is asleep or not. Unfortunately, because this would, of course, have been the best way of studying sleep in a herd situation, to be able to put an accelerometer on them or video recordings of them. But we still think that these electrodes are needed. There are some suggestions that are other physiological measures that can be used, and that's really interesting. We still have a major issue, and this is the rumination, because when the cows are ruminating, as I mentioned before, when we use the surface attached electrodes, is that the signal is disturbed by movement, and constant chewing is such a movement. And if the cows are ruminating for 8 hours a day, it means that 8 hours out of 24 hours is missing data. So this is what we are struggling with currently, to try to find other measures that we can use for sleep, or to filter the data so that we actually get the brain activity filtered, or the artifacts filtered out, and the brain activity to be still in the data.
Fascinating. So, Katy, would you like to add anything to that?
Well, this is why I'm currently doing a project looking at sleep in calves, because they don't ruminate.
Okay. Right.
So it's easier. It doesn't mean it's easy. It's their behaviors are a little bit better predictors of sleep. So when a calf like curls its head around and is laying down, that's they're likely in REM. It's not 100%, but it's better. But it's a little bit easier to measure sleep in calves compared to ruminating cows.
And the rumination in cows is very similar to the teeth grinding in human sleep. So it looks exactly the same. And I asked some human sleep researchers, but what do you do with the data? Do you have any filters? Can you clean it? Is there any measurements that we can use? And they're like, no, we just discard the data, or we don't use those persons in our study.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay,
then I would be excluded.
Yes. Hey, it's coming around to about an hour, and I know you guys are super busy. And so, Emma, any final thoughts on sleep before we go on?
No, not really.
Read our paper.
I
Yes.
did. I read it.
Not
it.
you, the
Okay,
listeners.
I read it. It was like, oh my gosh.
Tell the listeners that if you're interested in measuring sleep in cows, that we encourage you to read our paper, because we give lots of ideas and insights into how to estimate sleep, and maybe even some ideas for future research. And instead of competing with each other to see who can do this better, we should all just be collaborating and working together to help us understand sleep in cows.
That was so well said, Katy. And this is a paper, I think it's either out in press or it will be in the special issue. It's a review paper, Methods Used for Estimating Sleep in Dairy Cattle by Kathryne Proudfoot and Emma Ternman. Gives a lot of good information in terms of these methodology. And I honestly think you guys have really hit on something really interesting. I actually was at a dairy conference in Nova Scotia, and the speaker was showing videos of cows sleeping in bedded pack freestall barns. I tell you what, they seem more interested in that than what I had to show. But anyway, so I was going to ask you, and Katy sort of touched on this, but I was going to just talk to you about women in science, but maybe that's not what Katy wanted to talk about, what I wanted to talk about it. We have a lot of young people that listen to this. As you know, the face of faculty in agricultural sciences is changing. I think everybody was male when I grew up. Okay, all my professors at Cornell were male, every one of them, and here I am talking to two women. Do you have any thoughts on that, Katy? You mentioned it. Is this what you wanted to comment on, or advice, or what did you want to talk about?
Well, it's advice for anyone, I would say.
Regardless of gender.
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, the advice that I was going to give is regardless of gender, but I do think obviously it's important to support women in science as we are, becoming, especially in animal welfare, where there's a lot of young women interested, and we just need more women in positions of power, I think, as we slowly make our way to more administrative positions and things like that within academia. But in general, my take-home message to everyone is get enough sleep, because but it's true, because in academia, there's this really dogmatic philosophy that if you're not tired and working 100-hour work weeks or whatever, like, you're not doing what you should be doing in academia. And I did feel that way pre-tenure. I don't feel that way anymore. Like, I have very clear boundaries around when I work. I go to the beach a lot. I enjoy my life. But I think it's just really important to instill in people that self-care is important, and sleep is a huge part of that. Do what Matt Lucy does, and don't use an alarm clock if you can. I have a 6-year-old alarm clock that wakes me up every morning. But I agree, it's good to focus on taking care of ourselves, because at the end of the day, when it comes to sleep, we're better scientists if we're sleeping. We're more productive. We have better memories. We're healthier, and all these things. And then the very last thing I'll say is that I kind of have a motto right now, which is do things that bring you joy and work with good people. And so understanding sleep is something I've been curious about my whole life, which is why I'm studying it. And working with Emma has been amazing. I actually had fun writing this paper with her, and it's just been a fantastic collaboration to work with someone as lovely as Emma. So I encourage people to do things that make you happy and keep you curious, and work with good people.
That's fantastic advice. Thank you, Katy. Emma, did you want to say anything related to that, or anything on your mind relative to your career and your move from Sweden to Norway?
No, actually, my career advice was exactly what Katy told the last here: to do something you're interested in, and to have fun, and to collaborate with good people that you trust and that make you happy.
You guys have said it way better than I could ever say it, but I always tell my students, look, at science is way too hard not to have fun. It's not worth it. If you're not having fun, just do something else. And if you can find that topic that you find super interesting, and if you can pursue that topic in a joyful manner, being a faculty member is a really great job. It's really a great thing. So I want to just say two things. First of all, Katy, I'm going to come visit you. You're closer. I'm taking the bridge. I'm going to find you. Okay.
And find me on the beach.
I'm on the beach. And Emma, next time I'm in Norway, I've always wanted to drive up into the Arctic Circle. So you're only 6 hours from the Arctic Circle, right?
Yeah. And on the way, if you drive from the south, it will only take you maybe 14 hours, maybe 17 hours of drive from Arendal up to here. So you are welcome.
Oh, I wanted to see this place. So I would like to just, as we close, thank you both for taking the time to talk to us. These podcasts are super important. And I think the reason that motivates me is I just think it's so important to motivate people to study dairy and study interesting topics in dairy and learn about the people behind the story and find out that, hey, that could be me someday. Okay, I could do that. You guys have been great representatives. So thank you both for your time. And I know you're busy people, but thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having us. It's been a pleasure.
All right, everyone, that brings us to the end of our show. If you enjoy Dairy Digressions, be sure to like, subscribe, and rate, and spread the word to a friend or colleague. If you have feedback for us, please let us know at adsa@adsa.org. For show notes and more episodes of Dairy Digressions and to learn about everything going on at the American Dairy Science Association, go to adsa.org. Until next time, thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Matt.